Hey guys, welcome back to RBR. I'm your host Raz, and I'm never happier than when we have a brand new manufacturer that we've never had on the channel before with their flagship car. That's what we have to, oh wait, no, not this one. It's modern version, and that is the brand new GT Continental of the third generation in W12 form. Today we're going to explore the full history of Bentley. It's quite a complicated one actually, leading up to the VW takeover and then to this Generation 3 with a completely revamped car from zero, essentially. A car that finally Bentley have had some input in. We're going to check out all of the history, all of the lovely interior details, the sound, and then a full drive. You're absolutely going to love it. Let's dive straight in and check out this, the brand new Continental GT. So guys, as is often the case with manufacturers, Bentley's history started with a man of the same name, Walter Owen Bentley, better known as W.O. Now, he hadn't originally started in cars, he was actually involved in trains and then later in the war effort. But then after that, he wanted to put his energy towards something that he really wanted to do, and that was to build cars. And in his own words, he wanted to build a fast car, a good car, the best in its class. And so began the origins of Bentley Motors. They were known for creating grand tourers that could travel at high speed but with great comfort. And there was no better example of this than Walter's final car, which was the 8-litre. This thing was incredible, dead silent at 100 miles per hour, pure luxury for crossing the continent. And that's kind of why the name Continental came up. We'll get onto that later on. Sadly, after this, the Great Depression hit, so very few of these were ever made. There were cool factors. Every Bentley CEO gets to have this very car as their company car. But sadly, the Great Depression had a massive effect on Bentley, and their biggest rivals, Rolls-Royce, ended up buying the company sneakily via a shell company. And then every car after that, pretty much for about 3 decades, was essentially a Rolls-Royce reskinned. And there was a few standouts, particularly when H.J. Mulliner got involved and made some special cars that link back to our car today. And that's why we still have the idea of this Mulliner spec come up in modern Bentleys as well. So the two-door cars that link back to our car today were built back in the 1950s originally. They were built at the factory at Crewe, where in fact this car was built still today, which is quite cool. They were reskinned. Rolls-Royces, for example, the Silver Dawn was reskinned. It was 10% lighter as a Bentley. It was one of the fastest cars in the world at the time at 120 miles per hour. It was also one of the most expensive cars that you could buy at the time as well. Now, when you had the H.J. Mulliner ones, these were very, very special. And these were created because the UK didn't have motorways back then, so you really couldn't get up to speed. So they were created for traversing the continental European roads, hence the name Continental that we still use today. But what followed was 3 decades of essentially reskinned Rolls-Royces. That was until 1991 when the Continental R was created by a more ambitious Bentley team. And you can even see links in design from that car that trickle down to our car today, which is really nice. This had a great effect on sales and many, many more Bentleys were sold. But in 1997, parent company of both Rolls-Royce and Bentley, Vickers, decided to sell the companies off. And we'll go into the history of this because it was a little bit complicated in a future video with the flying spur. But long story short, VW outbid BMW and managed to get a hold of Bentley. As I said, there's a lot more that went into it, particularly with various logos and trademarks and other things. It's quite complicated, but we will go into it. So VW finally got a hold of the Bentley brand. It took them a little while, but in 2003, they finally released the Continental, but it was completely different to what we'd seen before. This was a sleek and sexy GT cruiser based on the VW Phaeton back then, which was back then, I guess, a pretty high-tech car. And this was different. This was sleek. This was sexy. The interior was incredible. And it was all topped off by an amazing W12 6-litre producing 560 brake horsepower. And it was a massive hit. Everybody wanted one. The waiting lists were full of Premiership footballers, and you can see why. It was a truly, truly desirable car. Then we had more versions because when a car begins to sell well for a company, you want to capitalize on that. So in 2006, we had the convertible, which who cares if you lose a bit of dynamism to get access to the open sky. After that, we had a faster version with the Speed. This reduced the weight a little bit and increase the horsepower by 42 brake horsepower. And then the cherry on top was the Super Sports. This was at 612 brake horsepower, a new gearbox with 50% faster shifting times, more aggressive looks, Pirelli sport tyres, and even carbon ceramic brakes. So quite the run the first generation had. Second generation, though, sadly, based on the same platform. So Bentley couldn't do as much as they wanted with it. It looks, I think, more like the first gen than it does to our brand new modern car, which betrays that platform sharing. Though it was sleeker looking, it had better tech like cylinder deactivation, it had assisted steering, we had a V8 come in the 500 brake horsepower version, which was cool as well. Then came our car today, the Gen 3. And you can see, it's a whole different animal. It's so much sleeker, it looks lower, it is longer, it's wider. The proportions are different because now this sits on a platform that Bentley have had some hands in making. The car that the Continental shares the platform with is none other than the Porsche Panamera. What an awesome car to share a sporting platform with. But Bentley will be quick to tell you that they were involved in the birth of this platform as well. They didn't simply reskin a Panamera. This is the MSB platform by VAR Group, and they were able to dictate the stuff that they wanted in it as well. So the car's monocoque is a mix of materials. We've got aluminium and high tensile strength steel. The outer layers are by majority aluminium, and the whole thing is thus more rigid. It's got a better front to rear weight balance. We've got a lower center of gravity, all great things for a car to begin with. So the car is actually 80 kg lighter, and that's despite so much more tech that we'll go into in a minute. We've got a 48 volt anti-roll system on this as well, which is undoubtedly going to help the handling. We've got 3 camber air suspension, which is again is shared with the Panamera. Oddly, there's no rear wheel steer. Maybe that'll come in a future version. And then the engine. Well, the placement of the engine is very important. It actually sits 150 millimeters further back. So it's got a better weight distribution of 55 to 45 versus what it had before. The engine, although similar in design to the previous one, is essentially all new. We've got revised cylinder heads, for example, but the end figure is 626 brake horsepower, which is incredible, and it feels super fast because the 0 to 60 is 3.6 seconds on this 2,200 kg GT Cruiser. That's incredible. So the car's old torque converter gearbox and Torsen center differential driveline was all binned in favor of now an 8-speed dual clutch, which is quite odd to have on an all-wheel drive car like this. But as you'll see later, it works very, very well. And a much cleverer all-wheel drive system that's mainly rear biased, but can bring up to 50% of torque to the front where needed, depending on your driving style. Everything changed for a car that should drive completely differently. And as you'll see later, it really does. Then we come on to design, because that whole platform betrays how they were able to then have a much sleeker looking car. And it does look sleeker, it looks lower, it looks longer, it looks wider because, well, it is. We've got an increase in the wheelbase to begin with. But where did this whole design come from? It originated from a lovely concept, one that was called the EXP10 Speed 6. That actually previewed a 2-seater car, so I don't know whether Bentley will do that later, but you can already see how it marries in terms of design to this car, particularly with the grille, particularly with the front lights. And you see these little details around now, the Continental, and we all loved that concept when it came out, so it's so great that the Conti was based on that car. Now let's have a look at all of the design, because there's some lovely details all around this car. I think my favorite bit that hits me first are the crystal lights on the front. They look fantastic, and you get this idea of crystal carrying across on the interior, as you'll see later as well. Really, really gorgeous. The grille itself, I think, is placed so much better than it has been in the past. It's much more upright, but it sort of forms a better look of the front end, yet somehow it's much more aggressive. Same thing with the lower mouths of the car, the intakes at the bottom, much more aggressive looking, really more like a sports sedan, I think, than a GT Cruiser, and it really suits the Conti. The bonnet is gorgeous, the roofline is low, all the chrome work that you normally find on the Conti has been all blacked out on this spec. I love the colour, it's cricket ball red, I'm a big cricket fan, so I really appreciate it, and it goes really well, I think, with all the gloss black details, even the wheels, which, a bit safe, but they look really good. There's a really nice trim piece that goes along the bottom of the door, and then when you look at the rear, oh, the rear is the best bit. I love the new rear lights. Before, they always looked a bit too blocky to me. These are wonderful. You got that crystalline look inside, but they also mirror the shape of the exhaust at the bottom, so it gives a really harmonious look. That paired with how wide the rear arches look and the shoulders. I love strong shoulders on cars. This one really does have some impressive stance on the road, particularly compared to the old ones. I like the Bentley logo on the rear boot and the typography, it's lovely. I keep coming back to it, but it's really the stance of it, how low it seems because of the small ground house, because of the elongated front bonnet compared to the older versions, all thanks to this new platform. It's really a stunning looking vehicle. So to emphasize how much has changed, let's compare the first Gen 1 car to the current one. And you can see the massive leap that it's taken. I really love the look of it. So guys, that's the exterior, that's some of the history. Now, the main event is also inside where there's some huge changes. Let's go and check it out right now. How awesome does this interior look? It's one of those interiors you can't quite put your finger on what it is until you sit down and you kind of try to take in all the little things, then you realize it's the small things that make the whole sum. The one thing everybody knows about the newer Bentleys is its best party trick, and I want to show you that right now. There it is. Let me show you that again because I absolutely love it. Let's turn it off. Now you'll note here, there was actually 3 sides. I'll get onto that in a second. But when the car is completely off, all you get is this lovely trim piece with the chrome going through the middle, and it's really minimalistic, but it's the right way to do minimalistic because it has so much character. And when I say the right way, when you look at something like the new S-Class, where Mercedes were trying to be minimalistic, but I felt it was just too bland because all you had was the screen and not much on the dash behind it. This has character to it compared to that. Let me show you again. So we get the car on. So there is your digital screen, and I'll come on to that in a minute. But when you're driving, you can have a 3rd screen. So most people don't realize there's actually 3 screens to this car. This is the 3rd one where you've actually got outside air temperature, you've got a compass, and you've got time. And it's brilliant. There's a lovely symmetry to it because you've got the 3 dials here, the 3 knobs underneath it, the 2 air vents and the clock underneath that, and then the little bits to control the air vents there, and these and this, and it all just works in terms of symmetry, and I love symmetry in cars. But this is something like I would have seen in the older Mercedes I've driven, like the 300 SL, where you've got these lovely chrome-plated analog dials with little needles in between them. It's not something you expect of a 2020 car, but Bentley have done it, and they've done it right, because this is kind of what you're expecting of their brand, I think. Now let's talk about some of those little things that make the whole sum of the parts. For example, there is this texture that we saw outside, as I mentioned, on the front and rear lights, that diamond texture, and that carries through on the inside on every tactile main piece that you're touching. For example, the drive select here, it's all around the edges of it. It's around the edges of the climate control selection as well. It's around the edges of the volume button and the knob here that controls the multimedia system. It's even on your gear stalks, it's on your cruise control, it's on the steering wheel where you have your selection rollers here. And I didn't realize until I felt it, but it's actually behind the shift paddles as well. And I only realized because I felt it, because you would not normally see these. But again, it's that tactile experience. It's even behind the door handles here. And when the ambient light hits it, you can see a reflection in the chrome of it glowing red, and you see these red diamonds in our case because we've chosen the red ambient lighting. It's a lovely, lovely feature, and this diamond feature continues in other parts of the interior as well. For example, look at the door card here and the stitching. Again, we've got those diamonds here. It's on the lower part of the seat in a different stitching. I'm sure when we eventually do a Bentley factory tour, which I'm trying to arrange for you guys, we will be told how many stitches there are in each of these diamonds. They look like hundreds and hundreds to me. It's really, really fine work. But then speaking of the stitching, you look at the rest of the materials in terms of the leather. Of course, you've got Nappa leather, but there's so many different types of stitching. For example, on the side of the center console here, you've got almost like a baseball stitch going along the side, which you really wouldn't have seen in many other places. It looks really unique and premium. But then you've got a totally different stitch on the side of the seats. And you've got perforated seats, and you've got normal diamond stitching on the lower half, and the more complex diamond stitching on top, and then the Bentley logo is stitched. All of these things coming together to give you a really premium looking interior. Then you've got other materials as well, like really bright chrome work, which you'll find like on this main gear selector here. and then you'll see it used on the dash and around where the ambient lighting is. But then it contrasts against a brushed aluminium look. So you get all these different textures that you see perhaps in classic cars instead. You'll even see that chrome work on the steering wheel. You'll see it around the driver zone as well. And then you've got the brushed chrome on your air vents. And then with the air vents, you've got these strange pulleys. Now, it took me ages to figure out which was open and which was closed. And I feel this is something that my little 1-year-old would break immediately, probably within a week. But again, it's different. You wouldn't see this anywhere else. Speaking of the steering wheel, I really like it. It's nice and small in diameter. It looks sporting, but it's got enough luxury to it. With the bright chrome elements, the Bentley logo, and those lovely shift paddles. But then you realize something, that there's a bit of Porsche going on here with the actual buttons on the steering wheel. The other thing I love is the central position gear selector here. You know, I like centrally positioned gear selectors. That's where the gears should be. I don't like stalks. It's really nicely done. I love that you can push the Bentley button, then engage the gears, and it just looks substantial and really cool. I love the engine start-stop button here, and I love the gear selector, how you can choose the gears without having to look down, because you get a nice readout in your digital screen in front. We've got some decent storage space in here as well, 2 cup holders as you would expect. The digital screen in front of you has a number of different views as well, so you can switch between a larger view of your current screen, such as phone or nav, and of course you've got stuff like night vision and stuff in there as well, and you can even get full screen maps as well. Now, the seats, as you would expect, are super comfortable. You've got loads of massaging functions inside there as well. In terms of the rear, they're really tight. They are full-size seats, but expect even someone like my 10-year-old to be quite tight. If you do manage to get them in though, they are very comfortable, and as you'll see, this car is one hell of a GT cruiser. So one of the nicest car interiors I've sat in terms of the character it has. It's got so much character, mixed with enough technology, I think, and enough throwback to what made cars special back in the day. And really, no one else is doing this kind of stuff. And I think it really helps Bentley stand out. Now, I'm sure you guys want to see what this W12 sounds like. Sorry to disappoint, there is a soft rev limiter, but I'm going to put it in sport mode and show you what it sounds like. So it's got some character, but nothing like when you're driving it. And really, guys, this car has surprised me compared to the other large cars I've driven recently. It is actually really capable. So let's just see what it can do on our usual roads right now. So guys, let's see what the new Conti GT is like out in the open already. I'm in sport mode and I'm having more fun than should be legal in such a big car. Now, to begin to talk about speed, I want to do a launch control because I've done a few. And whereas most big cars are quite disappointing in the way that they do it, this is actually quite exciting. Listen to that. Whoa! It's actually a lot quicker than I thought it would be in terms of the feeling. We know it's got the horsepower, 600 plus VHP, bounds and bounds of torque. But with that weight figure, you just think this thing is going to feel really, really slow. And to me, it feels way faster than, for example, the Panamera Turbo SE Hybrid, which again, very heavy car, more horsepower than this, but you just didn't get that inertia of speed. What helps, of course, with this is the W12 engine. I think it's got a really nice, refined exhaust mode, where it's not too shouty, whereas if it was too shouty in a car like this, I think you just wouldn't enjoy it. It doesn't suit the character of the whole car. This has got just enough. You've got a few pops and bangs, you've got lovely revs. And I must say, I'm surprised how good the gearbox is. It is worlds apart from the old slush box that the original Contis had. The addiction of putting down the speed has got to be up there with anything from AMG or Aston Martin with their GT cars. And going down this banking, piling on the speed, it is very happy, very, very happy. Sport mode is very responsive, but what I find also is a really good mode for daily driving. You stick it into the Bentley driving mode. And what this does, as you would expect, I'm sure, it's clever enough to decide when you want to drive sedately and slowly, as I've started to do now. So the revs have calmed down, the exhaust valves have started to close, and everything becomes that much more comfortable and quiet. But as soon as I want to plant some power down in Bentley mode, the car wakes up, the exhaust becomes louder, and I get all of the power immediately. And it's a really nice mix for your daily driving. I personally went into custom mode and I set everything to Bentley except for the steering, which I wanted to have in sport all the time because you get less of that light feeling. And as you'll see when I go on the handling course in a second, the steering is actually quite a good part of this car. What's nice is that the power is available almost immediately, but it's not jarring. There is sometimes a slight delay in the Bentley mode, but I think it works with the character of the car because you're not expecting instant response, because this is a luxury car first and a sports GT second. Now guys, for handling, I'm going to shift straight into sport mode. Now I found the sports steering to be that much better in terms of giving you a bit of weight on the steering, giving you a bit of feedback. I've driven a lot of big cars, and when I say big, I'm referring to stuff like the RS6, the M8 Competition, DB11, you know, that ilk of car on these same roads. And what I've found in already my short time with this Continental is that the steering is actually very, very good for such a big car. Now, by no means am I saying it's Porsche level of feedback, but I am saying it's not as disappointing as a lot of the cars that I've driven recently, where you just get this horrible numbness. With this Continental, I get a pretty good idea of what the front end is doing, and honestly, I was not expecting that of a car like this. With the old Conti, they said it was hard for it to hide its roots as having a VW platform, which of course was a negative for that car. With this car, I would also say it's hard for it to hide its roots of sharing a platform with Porsche, but instead of being a negative, suddenly it's a positive, because the Panamera, of course, is a brilliant and dynamic car, and suddenly the new Conti GT, well, it's actually got some dynamism to it. Now, by no means am I saying it's on the level of something like the DBS or the 812 Superfast, but what I am saying is you are a damn fool if you are comparing this car to those in the first place. This whole Super GT market is so wide in terms of the bandwidth that you can find within it, from anything from the 812 all the way to the 911, to the S63 Coupe, to the DB11. These are all such different cars that seemingly serve the same purpose, but they really don't. This is the type of car, much like the S63, where the majority of its usage is going to be, yes, enjoying the power that we've discovered and loved, but of course traveling in a load of luxury. And to get this, which is some dynamism in the car that's well over 2 tons, to me makes me happy. Like, normally I would not have fun in a car this size, but the engine is so wonderful. The gearbox, again, so cooperative. That matched with the dynamism of the platform itself makes for a really fun ride. My confidence is building in this car now. I can drive it faster and faster through these corners despite it being very wet today. The all-wheel drive system is very good. The better balance of this versus the old Conti is probably the biggest thing you're going to feel, with the engine sitting about 150 millimeters back. Yes, there's only, what, 76 to 80 kg of difference in terms of this being lighter versus the old one, but it's all the other changes, like, of course, the platform itself, the weight distribution being that much better in this model now, and of course the 48-volt electrically operated anti-roll bars that I think really, really help the handling of this car. Yeah, it's not to the level of some Super GTs, but again, the breadth of ability in this particular niche is so high. I'm very pleased with the way this car handles. Now, of course, you can switch it back into comfort, and it is genuinely up there on S-Class levels of comfort. I think the road noise is a lot more, which is probably to be expected of a car that's a lot more sporty in its nature. But I can fold the screen away here, which is wonderful. I think I've probably done that 200 times. I think my kid has done that probably 1,000 times. I'm surprised it still works, but it does if you do it multiple times. Look, now we're in comfort. The car rolls a little bit more. The steering is a little bit lighter. I could imagine doing thousands of miles in this car and being completely relaxed when I arrive at my destination. And I don't think that is the case with the majority of the Super GT cars, particularly the ones that the press will normally put this up against. I think the only true rival is something like the S-Class Coupe. I just would not put any of those so-called sports GTs up against this. It doesn't make sense. They cannot do what this does so brilliantly in terms of luxury. I must admit, you guys know I love big, fast luxury cars anyway. Our original S63 videos did so well and you guys enjoy them so much, and I never giggled as much as I have in those cars. And this is very much that same experience, but in an interior that is absolutely mind-blowing. And just generally, when you drive this thing, you feel like you're in a James Bond movie. I know I shouldn't say that because it's not an Aston Martin, but this is the feeling that you get. Or maybe even you're Bruce Wayne and you're heading back to Wayne Manor. That's what it feels like to me. And that's something you can't put a price on, because not every luxury car in the segment will make you feel like $1 million and have some sporting breadth of ability as well. And that is where this Conti has increased its breadth of ability massively. Now, as I said, this is only the beginning of the journey for the new Continental. There's going to be many variants to come, but what a great starting point for this vehicle. So guys, I hope you really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed this. I didn't think I'd be smiling as much as I have in this review, but it's been super enjoyable, and luckily I've got a good few days left with the Continental GT. So if you've enjoyed this, please do like, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and I'm going to rock it into the distance and have some more fun. See you guys.